Dubois wants what? Now? Peterson's spit landed inches from my feet. Table 7 again. Of course. I swear. Some nights. Anyway, I grabbed the lobster bisque, praying she wouldn't find a stray shrimp whisker. You know the type. Eats caviar but complains about the price of lemons. If they only knew what went on out back. Didn't see him at first, just a heap in the shadows by the bins. Arthur didn't beg, didn't even look up, just sat there, disappearing into the concrete. What choice did I have? My mom's bills don't pay themselves. But I swear the look in his eyes later, a flicker, like a pilot light catching. Those fancy diners wouldn't believe who they were really messing with. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Dubois wants what? Now? Peterson's spit landed inches from my feet. Table 7 again. Of course. I swear, some nights. Anyway, I grabbed the lobster bisque, praying she wouldn't find a stray shrimp whisker. You know the type. Eats caviar, but complains about the price of lemons. If they only knew what went on out back. Didn't see him at first, just a heap in the shadows by the bins. Arthur didn't beg, didn't even look up, just sat there, disappearing into the concrete. What choice did I have? My mom's bills don't pay themselves, but I swear, the look in his eyes later. A flicker, like a pilot light catching. Those fancy diners wouldn't believe who they were really messing with. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Chicago's November wind held a razor's edge. It sliced through the narrow alley behind Ethel Gard's, a 5-star haven on the Magnificent Mile, making Izzy shiver despite her haste. Inside, bathed in the golden glow of strategically placed lighting, million-dollar deals were being brokered over poached halibut. Outside, only the rats in despair thrived. And lately, Arthur. Izzy, officially Isabella Rossi, nursing student-turned-waitress, hated the shortcut, but it shaved precious minutes off her walk to the bus stop. Every second counted when you juggled double shifts and looming tuition bills. But every night for the past week, the hunched figure in the alleyway tugged at her. Tonight, the wind seemed particularly cruel, whipping at Arthur's threadbare coat like a malevolent spirit. Ethelgard's was Mr. Peterson's kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist and a meticulously groomed mustache. Each perfectly placed fork, each precisely timed wine pour, was a testament to his dedication to impeccable service. Table 7, Mrs. Dubois' table, was his Everest, and tonight Everest had complained again. "Rossi!" he'd hissed earlier, cornering Izzy near the dessert station. Mrs. Dubois finds her Chateau Margaux tepid. Ensure it is rectified. Immediately. Izzy bit back a retort about Mrs. Dubois' personality being far more tepid than any wine. Instead, she'd offered a practiced apology and scurried to find a replacement. That's what Peterson demanded: efficiency, subservience, and an almost inhuman ability to anticipate the whims of the obscenely wealthy. But the weight of that servitude pressed down on her. Each forced smile, each deferential nod, felt like another chip taken from her own soul. The tips, however, were what kept her going. They were the lifeline to her mother, struggling with medical bills back in Ohio. So she endured, gliding through the glittering dining room with a grace she didn't feel, a silent observer of a world she could only dream of. Finally, shift's end. The back alley offered no solace, only the greasy stench of overflowing dumpsters and the ever-present chill. And tonight, Arthur. He sat as always, a silent sentinel against the brick wall, his face obscured by shadows. The flickering fluorescent light above the service door did little to penetrate the gloom. He was a fixture now, another forgotten piece of the urban landscape. Izzy had initially ignored him, clinging to the anonymity that city life afforded. She had her own problems, her own burdens. What could she possibly do for a man who seemed so utterly lost? But something in his quiet stillness, the way he never begged or bothered anyone, kept her gaze drawn to him. He simply existed, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. Tonight, however, something was different. The wind seemed to burrow into him, shaking his frail frame. A sudden gust tore at his coat, revealing a glimpse of bare skin beneath. Izzy's conscience pricked. He looked utterly defeated. She hesitated, her bus due any minute. but her feet wouldn't move. The empathy she usually kept locked away for self-preservation surged to the surface. She remembered her mother's haunted eyes, the fear in her voice as she talked about losing their house. She couldn't walk away. Turning, she slipped back inside, the clatter of the kitchen a jarring contrast to the oppressive silence of the alley. Gus, the head chef, a mountain of a man with a surprisingly gentle heart, looked up from wiping down his station. "Izzy, forget something?" he grumbled, his voice a low rumble. "Gus," she began, trying to sound nonchalant, "is there any of that minestrone soup left over? The staff meal?" Gus raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Thought you weren't hungry. Got a date or something?" "No, it's for a stray." She hated lying, but the truth would invite questions she didn't want to answer. Gus grunted, but his eyes softened. He ladled a generous portion of the steaming soup into a large cardboard container, then grabbed 2 crusty rolls and wrapped them in a napkin. "Here," he said, pushing them across the counter. "Stray must be freezing out there." "Thanks, Gus," Izzy said, relief flooding her. He just shrugged. "Don't let Peterson catch you. He'd have a fit." Izzy nodded, grabbed the food, and hurried back into the biting wind. Arthur hadn't moved. As she approached, she spoke softly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me, sir?" He looked up, his eyes startlingly blue against the grime on his face, fixed on her. They were old eyes, weary with life, but they held a spark of intelligence, a hint of the man he once was. She extended the container. I thought you might be cold. It's just soup. It's hot." He stared at the offering, a battle raging in his eyes. Pride warred with hunger, dignity with desperation. Finally, slowly, he reached out a trembling hand and took the container. His fingers brushed hers, and his skin was like ice. He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling the steam. Then he took a tentative sip. A shudder ran through him, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse, but carrying an underlying resonance. A ghost of education and refinement. "You're welcome," Izzy whispered, pulling her thin coat tighter around herself. "My name is Isabella." He met her gaze, a searching look that made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time that night. "Arthur," he said, his voice a little stronger. "My name is Arthur." He took a bite of the roll, chewing slowly, deliberately, a hint of the man he used to be still visible. As Izzy watched Arthur eat with a strange, unwavering dignity that felt utterly out of place in the grimy alley, a small, fragile warmth blossomed in her chest. A warmth she didn't realize she'd been missing. This act of kindness became a nightly ritual. Izzy would secure leftovers from Gus, who had begun leaving a container on the prep counter without a word. Sometimes it was soup, sometimes a piece of shepherd's pie, once even a misshapen slice of chocolate cake deemed unsuitable for the dining room. Each night Arthur would be waiting, a silent figure huddled against the wall. Their conversations started small, hesitant fragments exchanged in the frigid air. He was a man of few words, but those words were carefully chosen, thoughtful. Izzy learned to read the nuances in his silences, the subtle gratitude in his blue eyes, the slight relaxing of his shoulders when she arrived. One night, driven by a sudden impulse, she brought him a thick wool blanket she'd found at a thrift store, a garish plaid pattern that hurt the eyes. "It's not much, but it's warm," she said, handing it to him. He accepted it with a solemn nod, wrapping it around his shoulders. "This is too much," and he said, his voice low. "No, it's not," she insisted. "It's getting colder. No one should be this cold." He looked down at the blanket, his fingers tracing the frayed edges. "There was a time I despised plaid." He offered a small, sad smile. "My wife, Eleanor, she loved it. She wanted to decorate our entire lake house in it. Tartan curtains, plaid sofas. I told her it was ghastly." He paused, lost in a memory. "Now, it feels like the warmest thing in the world." It was the first glimpse into his past, the first mention of a life before the alley. The lake house hung in the air between them, a stark testament to the gulf between then and now. As the days turned into weeks, Izzy found herself looking forward to their brief encounters. They were an anchor of simple human connection in her transactional world. She told him about her nursing studies, her dreams of working in an emergency room. He listened intently, his focus absolute, making her feel as if her aspirations were the most fascinating subject imaginable. "You have a healer's spirit, Isabella," he'd said one evening, after she'd recounted a particularly brutal chapter on pharmacology. "It's a rare and precious thing. Don't let the world dull it." His insights were often surprising. He spoke of architecture when admiring the cornices of the building across the alley, of economic theory when a newspaper headline caught his eye, of classical music when a faint melody drifted from a passing car. There was a vast, forgotten library in his mind, and Izzy was granted fleeting glimpses into its dusty corridors. She began to suspect that Arthur was not just a man who had fallen on hard times. He was a man who had fallen from a great height. Her small acts of kindness had not gone unnoticed. Peterson's office overlooked a section of the alley. One evening, as Izzy handed Arthur a container of lentil stew, she saw the silhouette of her manager watching from above. A cold dread settled in her stomach. The next day, he cornered her by the service station. "Rossi," he began, his voice dangerously low, "I am given to understand you've adopted a pet project in our service alley." Izzy's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean, Mr. Peterson." "Don't play coy with me," he snapped. "I'm talking about the vagrant you've been feeding. Ethel Guards maintains a certain standard of hygiene and security. We cannot have our establishment associated with that." He gestured vaguely toward the back of the restaurant, his lip curled in disgust. "He's not bothering anyone," Izzy said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's just an old man who's hungry." "He is a liability, Rossi," Peterson countered, his eyes like steel chips. "He is an eyesore. Our patrons, people like Mrs. Dubois, pay for an experience of luxury and comfort. An experience that does not include navigating a homeless encampment to get to their limousines. What if one of them were to see him? What if he were to accost someone?" "He would never do that," Izzy retorted, her defensiveness flaring. "He's a good man." Peterson let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "A good man? Rossi, your naivete is a liability in itself. I am giving you a warning. Cease your little charity project immediately. If I see you interacting with him again, you will be looking for a new job. Is that clear?" The threat hung in the air, suffocating her. This job was her lifeline. Without it, her mother's situation would become dire, her own future an impossible dream. Fear warred with a stubborn sense of injustice. Why was it so wrong to show a little compassion? That night, she hesitated at the kitchen door, the container of chicken paprikash feeling heavy in her hand. Peterson's threat echoed in her ears. She could just leave, go home, and pretend she'd never met Arthur. It would be the safe thing to do, the smart thing. Her life was complicated enough, but then she pictured him out there alone in the biting cold, waiting. He would think she had abandoned him, that her kindness had been a fleeting whim. The thought was unbearable. In a world that had already taken everything from him, she couldn't bear to be another person who turned her back. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped into the alley. Arthur was there, huddled under his plaid blanket. A look of profound relief washed over his face when he saw her. "I was worried," he said simply. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, handing him the food. She didn't mention Peterson. She didn't want to burden him with her problems. As he ate, she found herself studying his face, trying to piece together the man he had been. His hands, though calloused and grimy, had long, elegant fingers. His brow, when not furrowed with worry, was high and intelligent. He had the bone structure of a man used to being in charge, used to being listened to. "Arthur," she asked quietly, "if you don't mind me asking, what did you do before?" He paused, a piece of chicken halfway to his mouth. He looked out into the darkness of the alley for a long time before he answered. "I was a builder," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not of houses, not with my hands. I built companies. I took ideas, small sparks, and I breathed life into them. I built things that were meant to last." His words were heavy with a sorrow so deep it seemed to absorb the meager light around them. A builder of companies, a man with a lake house, and a wife who loved plaid. The puzzle pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was a tragic one. What happened? She asked, unable to stop herself. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of finality. A storm came, he said, his voice cracking, and I wasn't strong enough to hold the walls up. They came crashing down, and I was buried underneath. He looked at her, his blue eyes swimming with unshed tears. Sometimes, Isabella, it's easier to stay buried than to try and dig yourself out. A profound sadness settled over Izzy. She wanted to help, to do more than just provide a nightly meal, but she was just a waitress, struggling to keep her own head above water. As she left him that night, the weight of Peterson's threat and Arthur's tragic history felt like a physical burden. She was walking a tightrope, and the winds were picking up. She could only hope she had the strength not to fall. The first Friday of November descended upon Chicago with a frigid, sleeting vengeance. It was the kind of weather that drove everyone with a choice indoors, and for Ethel guards that meant a full house. The restaurant was buzzing, a hive of warmth and expensive perfume, a stark contrast to the miserable world outside. Izzy moved through the controlled chaos with practiced efficiency, balancing plates laden with seared scallops and foie gras. But her mind was elsewhere, on Arthur, alone in the alley with only his thin coat and the thrift store blanket, on the icy rain, on Peterson's threat. The immediate cause of her anxiety, however, was seated at table 7. Mrs. Dubois, a woman whose wealth was matched only by her sense of entitlement, was holding court with 2 other women of similar vintage. Mrs. Dubois was one of Peterson's most prized regulars, and tonight her face was a mask of pinched displeasure. "This Chateaubriand," she announced to Izzy, poking at the perfectly cooked piece of beef as if it were a dead rodent, "is tragically underseasoned. Have Chef Gus's taste buds gone on holiday?" "I am very sorry, madame. I will have the kitchen prepare another for you immediately," Izzy said, her smile feeling like a cheap plastic veneer. "See that you do," Mrs. Dubois sniffed before turning back to her friends. "And another thing, the element that this establishment is attracting lately, it's simply appalling. On my way in, my driver had to navigate around a filthy transient who has apparently set up camp in the service alley. He was staring at my car. Can you imagine?" Izzy's heart hammered against her ribs. She kept her face impassive, murmuring another apology as she collected the plate. But Mrs. Dubois wasn't finished. "A restaurant of this caliber should not have such refuse loitering about. It lowers the tone. It's a security risk. I shall have to have a word with Mr. Peterson." The threat was a promise. Izzy fled to the kitchen, her hands shaking. She delivered the complaint to Gus, who rolled his eyes and cursed Mrs. Dubois under his breath before firing up a new steak. But the damage was done. Izzy knew Peterson would have overheard the complaint or would hear it directly from the woman himself soon enough. For the next hour, she worked on autopilot, her stomach churning with dread. Every time she saw Peterson striding through the dining room, she flinched, expecting him to confront her. He didn't. He was waiting. She knew he was waiting for the opportune moment, a time when he could make an example of her. The end of her shift couldn't come soon enough. She had managed to wrap up a thick slice of pot roast and some roasted vegetables for Arthur. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the back door. The alley was darker than usual, the sleet turning to a wet, heavy snow that blanketed everything in a grimy slush. Arthur was there, shivering violently, his plaid blanket soaked through. He looked up at her, his face pale and drawn. "Isabella," he said, his teeth chattering, "you shouldn't be out in this." "Neither should you," she replied, her voice choked with worry. She handed him the warm container. "Here, eat this quickly." As his numb fingers fumbled with the lid, the alley was suddenly flooded with a harsh, bright light. The service door slammed open, and Mr. Peterson stood there silhouetted like a villain in a cheap play. He was not alone. 2 large, burly security guards flanked him. "Well, well, Rossi," Peterson's voice cut through the air, sharp and cruel. "I believe I gave you a very clear instruction." Izzy froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Arthur shrank back against the wall, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Peterson, please," Izzy began. "It's snowing. He has nowhere to go." "That is not my concern," Peterson sneered, taking a step forward. His expensive leather shoes squelched in the slush. He looked down at Arthur with utter contempt. "You! On your feet! You are trespassing on private property. Collect your garbage and be gone." Arthur struggled to stand, his limbs stiff with cold. He clutched his wet blanket, his meager worldly possession. I wasn't bothering anyone," he stammered. "Your very presence is a bother," Peterson spat. "You are a blight, a health hazard." He turned to the guards. "Escort this man off the premises and make sure he doesn't come back." The two guards moved toward Arthur, their faces impassive. One of them reached out to grab Arthur's arm. "No!" Izzy cried, stepping between them. "Stop it! You can't do this!" "Get out of the way, Rossi," Peterson warned, his face darkening with fury. "You are fired. Is protecting this bum worth your job?" For a split second, Izzy hesitated. Her mother's face flashed in her mind, the medical bills, the student loans. Everything she had been working for was about to be destroyed. She could step aside, let it happen, and maybe beg for her job back tomorrow. But then she looked at Arthur. She saw the terror in his eyes, the utter humiliation. He was a human being, and he was being treated like trash. The healer's spirit he had spoken of rose up in her, fierce and protective. Her fear was eclipsed by a white-hot rage. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength. "It is. You can't treat people this way. He is a person. He deserves dignity." "Dignity?" Peterson laughed, a horrible, sharp sound. "He forfeited his dignity when he chose to live in the gutter." He nodded to the guards. "Remove them both if you have to." One of the guards shoved Izzy aside. She stumbled, catching her balance on the slippery ground. The other guard grabbed Arthur's blanket and tossed it into a puddle of slush. He then seized Arthur by the collar of his thin coat, preparing to drag him away. "Get your hands off him!" Izzy screamed, lunging forward. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the tense standoff. It was the purr of a powerful, expensive engine. A sleek black sedan, a Bentley Mulsanne, had turned into the mouth of the alley, its LED headlights cutting through the falling snow like lasers. The car glided to a silent stop just a few feet away, its presence so incongruous in the filthy alley that everyone froze. The driver's side door opened and a man emerged. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Izzy's car. He had dark hair, sharp features, and an air of intense, formidable authority. His eyes, a startlingly familiar shade of clear blue, scanned the scene with cold, analytical fury. He looked from the cowering security guards to the sneering Peterson to the defiant Izzy, and finally his gaze landed on the old man being manhandled against the wall. The man's face, which had been a mask of cold anger, crumpled. The authority vanished, replaced by a look of raw, gut-wrenching shock and a pain so profound it seemed to suck the air out of the alley. Peterson, momentarily flustered by the appearance of such an obviously important person, puffed out his chest. "Sir, I apologize for this disturbance. This is an internal security matter. We are just clearing out some riffraff." The man in the suit didn't even look at him. His entire focus was on Arthur. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, his expensive shoes heedless of the filthy slush. His voice, when it came out, was a strangled whisper, a sound of disbelief and agony that seemed to tear from the very depths of his soul. "Dad!" The word hung in the frozen air, heavy and unbelievable. "Dad." For a moment, no one moved. The security guards froze, their hands still on Arthur. Mr. Peterson's sneer faltered, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of utter confusion. Izzy stared, her mind struggling to connect the dots. The man in the suit, a portrait of wealth and power, and Arthur, the homeless man she had been feeding in the alley. The juxtaposition was impossible, a scene from a surrealist film. Arthur, for his part, looked as though he had seen a ghost. He stared at the younger man. His blue eyes bore with a mixture of shame, fear, and a flicker of something long buried. He seemed to shrink further into himself, as if wishing the brick wall behind him would swallow him whole. The man in the suit took another step forward, his gaze never leaving Arthur's face. "Dad, is it really you?" His voice was ragged with emotion. Mr. Peterson finally found his had been feeding in the alley. The juxtaposition was impossible, a scene from a surrealist film. Arthur, for his part, looked as though he had seen a ghost. He stared at the younger man. His blue eyes bore with a mixture of shame, fear, and a flicker of something long buried. He seemed to shrink further into himself, as if wishing the brick wall behind him would swallow him whole. The man in the suit took another step forward, his gaze never leaving Arthur's face. "Dad, is it really you?" His voice was ragged with emotion. Mr. Peterson finally found his voice, though it was a reedy, uncertain thing. "Sir, I believe there must be some mistake. This man is a vagrant, I assure you." The man's head snapped toward Petersonen. The cold fury returned to his eyes, magnified a hundredfold. It was a look of such chilling intensity that Petersonen physically recoiled. "Did I speak to you?" the man said, his voice lethally quiet. Peterson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No, sir. Mr. Vance, I didn't realize Vance." The name hit Izzy like a physical blow. Nathaniel Vance, the reclusive, mega-successful CEO of Vance Holdings International, the parent company that owned Athol Guards and dozens of other high-end establishments. A man famous for his ruthless business acumen and for being intensely private. He was a legend, a phantom figure whose picture was rarely seen, and he was standing in their garbage alley calling a homeless man dad. Nathaniel Vance ignored Peterson completely, turning his full attention back to Arthur. "What happened to you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I looked for you for years. I thought you were gone." He reached out a hand, then let it drop, as if unsure of what to do. Arthur finally spoke his voice, a dry rasp. "Nathaniel, you should not be here." His eyes darted around the alley at the guards, at Peterson, at Izzy. The shame on his face was a palpable thing. "I own this building," Dad Nathaniel said, a bitter edge to his tone. "I have every right to be here. The question is, why are you here like this?" His gesture encompassed the tattered coat, the slush-covered ground, the entire miserable scene. Before Arthur could answer, Peterson, sensing the catastrophic shift in power, began a desperate attempt at damage control. He shoved one of the security guards toward Arthur. "You imbeciles," he hissed. "Let go of Mr. Vance's father. Help him get him his blanket." The guard who had thrown the blanket into the puddle scrambled to retrieve it. He held out the soaking, filthy wool as if it were a holy relic. The other guard released Arthur's collar so quickly it was almost comical. Nathaniel's icy gaze settled on Petersonen again. "You," he said, the single word dripping with menace. "What is your name?" "Peterson, sir. Robert Peterson." "I am the general manager," he said, wringing his hands. "Sir, it was all a misunderstanding. A complaint from a patron, Mrs. Dubois, about vagrancy. I was merely enforcing company policy on security and hygiene." "I had no idea company policy." Nathaniel repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Is it company policy to have your security guards assault an elderly man in a snowstorm? Is it company policy to throw a man's only source of warmth into the gutter? Is it your policy to treat a human being like garbage?" Each question was a hammer blow, and Peterson visibly flinched with each one. "No, sir, of course not. It was an error in judgment, a terrible error." Nathaniel's eyes then moved to Izzy. She was standing to the side, soaked and shivering, watching the entire scene unfold in a state of shock. He took in her waitress uniform, the protective way she was standing near his father, the defiant anger still visible on her face. "And you?" he asked, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. "Who are you?" "My name is Isabella Rossi," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I was a waitress here?" Peterson jumped in. "She was insubordinate, Mr. Vance. I had to terminate her employment. She was encouraging the loitering, providing him with food against direct orders." Nathaniel looked from Petersonen back to Izzy. Then he looked at his father, who was still clutching the container of pot roast Izzy had given him. He seemed to understand everything in an instant. "You were feeding him?" he asked Izzy. Izzy lifted her chin. "Yes, he was hungry and cold. Even after this man," he gestured to Peterson with contempt, "ordered you to stop?" "Yes." A complex emotion flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. Surprise, respect, perhaps even gratitude. He turned his attention back to his father. He took off his own exquisitely tailored suit jacket and without a word draped it over Arthur's thin, trembling shoulders. The cashmere jacket was absurdly out of place over the tattered coat, a symbol of the vast, incomprehensible gulf between these two men's lives. "We're getting you out of here," Nathaniel said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. He put a supportive arm around his father, who leaned on him, suddenly looking infinitely old and fragile. He started to guide Arthur toward the warmth of the waiting Bentley. As they passed Peter Sonnen, Nathaniel paused. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet venom in his words was more effective than any shout. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "be in my office on the top floor in 1 hour. Pack up your personal belongings from your desk first. You will not be returning to it." He then looked at the 2 security guards. "You 2 are also finished. Leave the property immediately." He looked back at Izzy, who was still standing rooted to the spot, drenched and jobless, and utterly bewildered. "Miss Rosie," he said, his voice now a command, "you will come with us." It wasn't a question. He helped his father into the plush leather interior of the Bentley. He then held the door open for Izzy, his blue eyes meeting hers. She saw in them the same intelligence she had seen in Arthur's, but sharpened by a lifetime of wealth power and a deep, simmering anger. Numbly, she slid into the car, the scent of rich leather and quiet luxury overwhelming her senses. The heavy door closed with a silent, definitive thud, shutting out the alley, the falling snow, and the ruined figure of Mr. Peterson. The car pulled away as smoothly as a sea, leaving behind one world and entering another, more complicated one. Izzy sat in the cavernous back seat next to a homeless man in a billionaire's jacket. Her life having just been irrevocably, terrifyingly, and completely turned upside down, the Bentley moved through the streets of Chicago with an imperious silence, its interior a cocoon of warmth and quiet against the storm outside. Izzy sat on the edge of the supple leather seat, acutely aware of her damp, cheap uniform and the slush melting from her shoes onto the plush carpeting. Beside her, Arthur was huddled under Nathaniel's jacket, staring out the window. His reflection, a ghostly image superimposed over the glittering rain-streaked city lights. He looked small and lost in the opulent space. In the front passenger seat, Nathaniel Vance was a coil of barely controlled tension. He spoke quietly into his phone, his voice clipped and authoritative. "Clear my morning, all of it. Yes, I don't care who it is, and have Dr. Alistair Reed meet me at the penthouse in 1 hour. Tell him it's an emergency, a personal one, and get me everything you can find on a Robert Peterson general manager at the Michigan Avenue Ethel Guards. I want it all." He ended the call and the silence in the car became heavy, filled with the unsaid history of years. The car descended into a private underground garage and came to a stop in a reserved spot before a private elevator. A security detail materialized, discreet and professional, flanking them as Nathaniel led his father and a stunned Izzy into the elevator. The ascent was silent and dizzyingly fast. When the doors opened, they opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment that seemed to occupy the entire top floor of the skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the Chicago skyline. The city lights a glittering carpet below. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist design. All clean lines, polished chrome, and vast open spaces furnished with art that probably cost more than her family home. It was beautiful, but told less a home than a museum. Nathaniel led his father to a large cream-cold sofa. Arthur sat down stiffly, looking profoundly uncomfortable, clutching the suit jacket around him like a shield. "I'll get you some dry clothes," Nathaniel said, his voice strained before disappearing down a long hallway. Izzy stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do or where to go. She felt like an intruder in this deeply personal, deeply painful family reunion. Arthur looked at her, his expression a mixture of gratitude and deep mortification. "Isabella," he said, his voice, "I am so sorry you were dragged into this, for what this has cost you." "Don't apologize," she said, walking over to him. "I'm glad you're safe and warm. That's all that matters." Nathaniel returned with a thick cashmere robe and a towel. He knelt before his father, his movements stiff. "Dad, you need to get out of those wet things." There was an agonizing awkwardness as Nathaniel helped his father, whose hands were trembling too much to manage the buttons out of the damp, tattered layers. Underneath, he was painfully thin, his body a frail shadow of what it must have once been. As Nathaniel wrapped the warm robe around him, Izzy saw the younger man's jaw clench, his eyes shimmering with an unspeakable pain. Once Arthur was settled, wrapped in the robe, and with a blanket over his legs, Nathaniel finally turned his full attention to Izzy. He gestured to another chair. "Please sit, Miss Rosie." He sat opposite them, the vast living room feeling like an interrogation chamber. "I owe you an explanation," he began, though his words seemed directed more at the air between him and his father than at Izzy, and a profound debt of gratitude. He looked at his father. "I haven't seen him in 10 years. Not since the funeral." The silence that followed was thick with meaning. "After my mother Elena passed away," Nathaniel continued, his voice tight, "everything fell apart. She was the heart of our family. My father, he wasn't just grieving. He was swallowed by it. He was the founder and CEO of Vance Development, one of the biggest commercial real estate firms in the Midwest. He built it from nothing. But after Mom died, he lost his fire. He stopped going into the office, stopped taking calls." Arthur stared at his hands, his face a mask of old pain. "I was young." Nathaniel went on, a note of self-rumination in his voice. 24, ambitious, angry. I saw his grief as a weakness. I saw the company, his life's work, crumbling. His business partner, a man he trusted like a brother, Marcus Sterling, was circling like a vulture. Marcus. Arthur whispered the name, tasting like poison. I tried to warn him. Nathaniel said his frustration from a decade ago, still raw. I told him Sterling was cooking the books, leveraging the company's assets for his own gain. But he wouldn't listen. He couldn't see anything beyond his own sorrow. Nathaniel's voice grew harder. "So I confronted Sterling myself. There was a terrible fight. I was pushed out. A week later, Sterling forced my father to sign over his controlling interest for pennies on the dollar, claiming it was the only way to avoid bankruptcy. My father, in his state, just signed. He lost everything. The company, our home, everything." He finally looked directly at Arthur. "And then you disappeared. I came to the house and you were just gone. A note saying you were sorry and that I should forget about you. I hired private investigators. I searched for years. I built my own empire from scratch, fueled by rage and a desire to crush men like Marcus Sterling. I thought you were dead." The story hung between them, a decade of misunderstanding, anger, and pain. Arthur finally looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "I was so ashamed, Nathaniel," he said, his voice breaking. "I failed you. I failed your mother's memory. I let Sterling destroy everything I'd ever built. I couldn't face you. I couldn't bear for you to see the man I had become, the man who lost it all because he couldn't pull himself out of the darkness. I thought it was better for you to think I was gone than to know I was a ghost, a failure." He described his years on the street, a slow downward spiral of odd job shelters, and eventually the crushing anonymity of homelessness. He had ended up in Chicago by chance, drifting from one place to the next, the memories of his past life too painful to confront. Izzy sat in stunned silence, listening to the heartbreaking confession. This was the storm Arthur had told her about, the one that had buried him. It wasn't just financial ruin, it was a collapse of the soul. Nathaniel listened, his face impassive, but a single tear traced a path down his cheek. He wiped it away angrily. "You didn't fail me, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed you. I was an arrogant, angry kid. I saw your grief and called it weakness. I should have been there for you. I should have stayed. I should have fought for you, not just for the company." The doorbell chimed, a soft, polite sound that was nonetheless jarring. A moment later, a distinguished, silver-haired man in a suit was shown in. "Dr. Reed." Nathaniel stood up. "Dad, this is my friend, Dr. Alistair Reed. He's going to take a look at you. Make sure you're okay." Dr. Reed approached Arthur with a kind, gentle demeanor and began speaking to him in a low, soothing voice. Nathaniel used the opportunity to draw Izzy aside toward the massive windows. "I'm Rosie, Isabella," he said, his voice filled with an exhaustion that went beyond a single night. "What you did for my father, I don't have the words to thank you. You showed him kindness when his own son had lost track of him. You stood up for him when my own employee was." He trailed off, his jaw tight with anger. "You have a character that money cannot buy. I am in your debt." Izzy shook her head. "I didn't do it for a reward, Mr. Vance. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, he said, a faint smile touching his lips for the first time. That's what makes it all the more remarkable. He looked out over the city he owned. A significant piece of my father once told me that the true strength of a structure isn't in its height, but in its foundation. It seems the foundation of my company has some cracks. He looked back at her. And I think you are exactly the kind of person I need to help me fix them. The hour that Nathaniel had given Mr. Peterson had elapsed. Right on schedule, a notification pinged on Nathaniel's phone. He straightened his tie, his face hardening back into the mask of the ruthless CEO. If you'll both excuse me for a moment, he said to Izzy and Dr. Reed, who was now checking Arthur's blood pressure. I have some garbage to take out. He walked over to a large desk in the corner of the room and touched a screen. A video feed appeared showing Mr. Butt Peterson sitting nervously in a sterile white conference room on the top floor of the Ethelgard's building. He was dabbing sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. Nathaniel pressed a button. Mr. Peterson, can you hear me? On the screen. Peterson jumped, startled by the disembodied voice. Yes, Mr. Vance. I'm here. I have reviewed your file, Mr. Peterson. Nathaniel began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. 22 years of service, multiple managerial awards, glowing performance reviews based on profitability and efficiency. He paused. I've also cross-referenced your tenure with employee turnover rates and anonymous complaints filed to HR. It paints a different picture, a pattern of bullying, intimidation, and fostering a toxic work environment, all carefully swept under the rug. As long as the numbers looked good. Peterson's face went pale. M. Vance, I can assure you those are likely the grumblings of disgruntled, underperforming staff. Was Isabella Rossi an underperforming staff members? Nathaniel cut in, his voice like ice. Well, her work was adequate, but her judgment was poor, as you saw. Her judgment was the only thing of value in that alley tonight, Nathaniel retorted. He leaned closer to the camera. I also ran a check on your security contractors. The two men you had with you tonight have a history of excessive force complaints from their time in law enforcement. You hired them specifically, didn't you, Peterson? You liked having attack dogs to enforce your petty kingdom. Peterson was speechless, his mouth agape. You are a liability, Mr. Peterson. You mistake cruelty for authority and fear for respect. You are the antithesis of everything an establishment bearing my family's name should represent. Your employment with Vance Holdings is terminated effective immediately. Your severance will be the bare minimum required by law. If you attempt to fight this, I will release the security footage from the alley to the press. I imagine the story of a manager at a luxury restaurant ordering an assault on a homeless man in a snowstorm who also happens to be the owner's father would make for interesting reading. Am I clear, Crystal? Mr. Vance Peterson squeaked, his entire demeanor collapsing. Security will escort you from the building. You are never to set foot on any of my properties again. Nathaniel cut the feed, the screen going black. He took a deep breath, the anger slowly receding from his face, leaving behind a deep weariness. He turned back to the room. Dr. Reed was finishing his examination. He's suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, and the early stages of hypothermia, the doctor reported quietly to Nathaniel. But nothing that can't be treated with rest, warmth, and proper nutrition. The deeper wounds, as I'm sure you know, aren't physical. He needs care, and he needs his son. Nathaniel nodded, the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders. After the doctor left, leaving behind some initial medications and instructions, an awkward but peaceful quiet settled over the room. Arthur had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the sofa, his face, even in slumber, etched with years of hardship. Nathaniel poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Izzy. They stood by the windows, watching the snow fall over the city. Now Nathaniel said, his voice softer. Let's talk about you, Isabella. Please call me Izzy, she said. Izzy, he corrected himself with a small smile. You lost your job tonight because of me, because of my father. I intend to rectify that. He paused, studying her. I could give you your job back. I could promote you. I could write you a check that would solve all your financial problems. You just have to name your price. Izzy looked away from him, out at the city. She thought about the offer. A check. It was tempting. It would be so easy. She could pay off her mother's debts, re-enroll in school, and be free from the constant, crushing anxiety of poverty. It was everything she thought she wanted. But then she thought about Arthur shivering in the alley. She thought about Peterson's sneering face. She thought about the countless other people like Arthur, invisible and forgotten. A check would solve her problems, but it wouldn't change the world that created them. "I don't want a check, Mr. Vance," she said quietly. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Then what do you want? A promotion? You could manage any of my restaurants. You've certainly proven you have more integrity than the last person in the job." "That's not it either," she said, turning to face him. "When I was helping your father, it wasn't because I wanted a reward. It was because he needed help. He told me. He told me I have a healer's spirit." She took a breath, finding her courage. "Your company, Vance Holdings, you have so much power, so much influence. You own dozens of businesses, employ thousands of people. You have kitchens that throw away perfectly good food every night, while people starve just outside the back door." She looked him directly in the eye. "You asked me what I want. I want you to do better. You said your foundation has cracks. Let me help you fix them. Start a program, a real one, a foundation that uses the leftover resources from your businesses to help the homeless in this city. Not just with food, but with shelter, with job training, with medical outreach. Turn your back alleys from places of shame into points of contact for help." She was impassioned, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Let me run it. My nursing education, my experience, I understand both worlds. I know what it's like to struggle, and I've seen firsthand how broken the system is. Don't just give me a reward. Give me a responsibility." Nathaniel was silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. He studied her with an intensity that made her feel as if he were looking right into her soul. He had expected her to ask for money or power for herself. Instead, she had asked for the power to help others. She hadn't just shown kindness to his father. She was challenging him to build a legacy of kindness himself. Finally, he broke into a slow, genuine smile. It transformed his face, erasing the hard edges and revealing a warmth she hadn't seen before. "A healer's spirit," he repeated softly, looking over at his sleeping father. "He was right about you," he extended his hand. "All right, Izzy Rossi, you're hired. You won't be a waitress anymore. You will be the first ever executive director of the new Vance Foundation for Urban Assistance. You will have my full backing, a significant budget, and a direct line to me. Your first task," he said, his smile widening, "is to design a program that ensures no one ever has to freeze in one of our alleys again." Izzy looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face. She saw not a ruthless billionaire, but a son who had found his lost father, a man who had just been reminded of his own capacity for good. She shook his hand, her grip firm. It wasn't charity he was offering her. It was a chance to build something that would last. 6 months later, spring had thawed the Chicago frost, and with it the years of coldness between father and son. Arthur, now living in a quiet brownstone, found peace in his garden and in the daily visits from Nathaniel. They were rebuilding their lost decade, not with grand gestures, but with shared silence and quiet understanding. Arthur saw the lonely man beneath his son's powerful exterior, and Nathaniel finally saw his father's past, not as a failure, but as a wound that was finally healing. The Vance Foundation, with Izzy at the helm, had become a beacon of hope. The Ethelgard project transformed the company's service alleys from places of neglect into hubs of compassion, distributing food and resources. Izzy's purpose radiated from her, and Nathaniel found himself increasingly drawn to her fire. He saw in her the integrity his empire lacked and the warmth his own life was missing. One evening, standing in the very alley where their lives collided, he confessed his feelings. He saw not just a brilliant director, but the woman he was falling in love with. In his eyes, Izzy saw not a billionaire, but a man rebuilding his own heart. She took his hand, ready to build a new project together. A single act of kindness hadn't just saved a life, it had rebuilt a family and forged a future none of them could have ever imagined. And so a single cup of soup offered in a cold, dark alley set in motion a series of events that mended a broken family, reshaped a corporate empire, and brought hope to thousands of forgotten souls. The story of Isabella, Arthur, and Nathaniel is a powerful reminder that we are all just one choice away from changing a life. One act of seeing the person, not the circumstance. What would you have done in Izzy's position? Have you ever witnessed a small act of kindness that had huge consequences? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We believe these stories are important and need to be heard. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for listening.